5 years ago, our first Dawn or Doom conference started with a keynote from James Barrett, whose book, Our Final Invention, warned that artificial intelligence threatened the existence of the human race itself. Futurist Thomas Frey has a different view. He calls the notion that the advent of AI will lead to massive job loss one of the biggest myths in today's technology-oriented world. Rather, AI will redefine work and give us additional capabilities, Frey says. More importantly, AI is only a small piece of tomorrow's disruptive technology. The same tech that will be creating an explosion of future industries, paving the way for an era of superemployment and radically transforming future education in the process. Frey is the founder of the DaVinci Institute, a Colorado-based futurist think tank. Over the past decade, he has built an extensive following based on his insights and his ability to describe the opportunities ahead. Having started 17 businesses himself and assisted on the development of hundreds more, the understanding he brings to his audiences is a blend of reality-based thinking coupled with a clear-headed visualization of the world to come. Before launching the DaVinci Institute, Frey spent 15 years at IBM as an engineer and designer. His keynote talks on futurist topics have reached audiences ranging from high-level government officials to executives in Fortune 500 companies, including talks at NASA, Disney, TED, and many more. He has appeared in national and international publications, among them the New York Times, USA Today, Forbes, Popular Science, and the National Geographic. Today, he will present a talk titled Future Education, Using AI to Turn the Coming Wave of Disruption into an Opportunity. Thomas Frey's presentation is about an hour long, so we'll enjoy that, and then we'll take about 15 minutes at the end for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, I would ask you to use one of the microphones on either side of the auditorium as we're recording the presentation. Also, please take a moment to silence all your electronic devices, but feel free to tweet using the hashtag Dawn or Doom. An artist from the Ink Factory is creating a visual recap of the talk from our presenter, and you're welcome to take pictures after and share them on social media. And don't be afraid to chat with the artist and ask questions when they're finished drawing. Thank you, and please enjoy Thomas Frey.
Hi, it's a great honor to be with you here today. We're gonna look at the future from a lot of different angles here. So 2024, Elon Musk launches the first ship to colonize Mars. This is his timeline. This is the first manned mission to Mars. And then in 2026, the people of Mars establish themselves as a self-governing people. In 2028, work begins on building the first Mars colony. So 2030, as demand for colonized Mars skyrockets, the Mars leaders devise a plan to fund the build-out, because they're going to need a lot of money to do all this. And so in 2032, the first land sail begins on planet Mars. Is that a realistic scenario? Do we live on an overpopulated planet or an underpopulated universe? Jeff Bezos thinks that we will have over 1 trillion people living in our solar system. Is that realistic? And how will this sale of land on Mars affect real estate investments on Earth? Suddenly we can buy 100 acres of land for maybe $1,000. There's over 35.5 billion acres of land on Mars. That's more than on planet Earth. They can sell it really cheap. Does it make sense that one person on Earth suddenly takes over another planet? Somewhere along the way, I mean, there's going to be a lot of pushback. People on Earth say, no, you can't do that. But then the comeback will always be, well, the people of Mars have spoken. I think that's an interesting perspective because that suddenly it's a whole different way of looking at the world. See, every future industry will start as a micro industry. I wrote a column recently on this prediction that over the coming 2 decades, we're going to have over 100,000 new micro industries that take root. And every micro industry starts as just 1 or 2 businesses that crop up, and some of them will take off, some of them will die on the vine. But as Chris Anderson, the former managing editor of Wired magazine says, he says, when the tools of production become available to everybody, everybody becomes a producer. All of this emerging technology we see coming out of the woodwork is giving us the tools of production. It's giving us the ability to create things that we could never create in the past. So one of the examples I love to use is the shoe industry. The shoe industry, every year we sell 21 billion pairs of shoes around the world. That's roughly 3 pairs of shoes for every person on the planet. 21 billion, that's a lot. Now the projections are that within 5 years, 5% of those will become smart shoes. Now what are smart shoes? Smart shoes mean different things to different people. In January, I was at the Consumer Electronics Show. There's a company making smart shoes for people that were fall victims. So if somebody fell down, had an accident, they'd send out a signal for somebody to come and help them back up again. But if you start thinking about it, smart shoes can open pores on the sides, they can ventilate things, they can extend spikes on the bottom, they can measure every stride, they can measure every step that you take. They understand all kinds of things about your feet, which gives rise to the idea of hyper-individualized shoes for every niche application. Anybody that plays lacrosse can have their own special shoes. Anybody that's a mountain climber, people that are left-handed, people that are amputees, people that play organ. Every niche application will have their own shoes. And this will give rise to lots of little mom and pop businesses that will crop up and start. Some of them will turn into something pretty significant. So this will give rise to all kinds of shoes, crazy things like, I don't think that would look good on me, but maybe. And these shoes are going to come out of the woodwork. I mean, weird, strange types of shoes. I kind of like them, but I'm not sure that they're a good fit for me. It will also give rise to very smart shoes that if you're going out jogging at night, you happen to like to do that, your shoes will suddenly realize that it's dark outside. So your shoes will signal for a drone to come over, fly overhead, and light up the path in front of you. Now your shoes are also authorized to make a payment of $20 an hour for that drone or whatever it costs. And we can have the same type of shoe that's an umbrella drone that flies over. It knows it's wet outside, so it brings this umbrella drone over the top, and it also authorizes a payment. Personally, I want a smart shoe that when I call it by name, it'll come to me. I think that's reasonable. Maybe not. See, we're a very backward-looking society. We're backward-looking because it's just human nature. See, we've all personally experienced the past. As we look around us, we see evidence of the past all around us. In fact, all information we come into contact with is essentially history. So the past is very knowable, and yet we're going to be spending the rest of our lives in the future, so it's almost as if we're walking backwards into the future. My job as a futurist is to help turn people around to give them some idea what the future might hold. So how does the future get created? Well, the future gets created in the minds of everybody around us. We all participate in creating the future, but certainly some of us have more influence than others. But people make decisions today based on their understanding of what the future holds. So I use this phrase quite a bit. The future creates the present. Now, this is just the opposite of what most people think. Most people think that what we're doing today is somehow going to create the future. But from a little different perspective, it's these images of the future that we have in our head determine our actions today. So here's the key thing. If we change someone's vision of the future, we change the way they make decisions today. That's my promise to you. My promise to you is, before you leave here today, I'm going to change your vision of the future. And as a result, you will walk out of here making different decisions. If I don't, just please hold my feet to the fire. I'll try harder. Now, I get asked a lot if I have a crystal ball. And yes, I do have a crystal ball. It was sitting around at home, and my wife said, "Why don't you just take this to the office? It's just collecting dust." So reluctantly, I put it in the car, and I was taking it to the office. I was no more than about 4 or 5 minutes down the road, and I looked over, and I saw that my crystal ball had actually started a fire on the seat next to me. Now, this is a giant lens, sunshiny Colorado, and yeah, it's like Boy Scouts 101 going on in the seat next to me. Luckily, I was able to put the fire out, and it didn't cause any serious damage. But then I had a revelation. Obviously, the revelation came from my crystal ball. And the revelation was that the newspaper headlines the next day were going to say, "Futurist killed by his own crystal ball." And he didn't see it coming. So that's my disclaimer. I don't see everything. As Larry Page says, the main reasons that companies fail is that they miss the future. I happen to agree with that. Companies are getting blindsided every day by something new. See, we have two types of innovation. We have disruptive innovation that's disrupting existing industries, and then we have catalytic innovation. Catalytic innovation is the type of innovation that creates entire new industries. So in the past, we looked at types of catalytic innovations, things like electricity, automobiles, airplanes, photographs, sewing machines. All these things went on to create multi-billion, multi-trillion-dollar industries. But here's the thing, all industries are a bell curve. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yes, every business that we have today, 1,000 years from now, will have been replaced multiple times, every industry. The other key thing to remember is that most of the profitable industries we have today end up being in the second half of the bell curve, constantly being forced to do more with less. So which category of micro industries will start affecting your career the soonest? I mean, this is becoming kind of a nagging anxiety out there. Am I still going to have a job 5 years from now? And if not, what new skills do I need to learn? Now, in 2012, I was giving a TED Talk in Istanbul, and I made the prediction that by 2030, over 2 billion jobs are going to disappear. Now, this was never intended to be a doom or gloom statement. It was never intended to say we're going to have 2 billion people unemployed in the world. It was intended to be a wake-up call. It was intended to say that we're going to have to create new jobs at a faster rate than ever before. And I get quoted on this in newspapers, magazines, TV stations, literally all over the world. What this is, though, is it's what I refer to as the level problem. Now, most of us have this tool in our house, in our garage. We use it to straighten pictures on a wall. We use it to do carpentry work. But once we download a level app, then a lot of us don't need to buy that tool. That means we don't have to make as many aluminum frames. We don't have to make as many glass bulbs. We don't have to have the assembly people doing the shipping and the receiving. The retail stores that are handling it. Every time we download a mobile app, we eliminate a piece of a job. It's a very, very tiny piece of a job. But once we start downloading billions upon billions of mobile apps, it starts affecting a lot of things. Oxford researchers looked at the same problem a year later. In 2013, they looked at 700 different occupations. They concluded that machines are going to take over 47% of today's jobs. Coincidentally, that works out to right around 2 billion. So thank you, Oxford. That was nice. But we're not automating entire jobs out of existence. We're automating tasks out of existence. If you're a meter reader, and rather than driving out and reading the water meter and electric meter, we can have the information sent in wirelessly. The job itself gets redefined. Naturally, we can do it with fewer people, but it doesn't mean the job is entirely gone. people are constantly thinking it's us versus the AI, it's us versus the robots, when it's us with them. This is a picture of an exoskeleton that a guy is wearing that allows him to perform 3 times as much work in an average day. See, on one hand, we're eliminating jobs, the other hand, we're freeing up human capital, but just because our jobs go away doesn't mean we've run out of work to do. That's fairly ludicrous. Have you looked around? As long as we have problems, we're always going to have work to do. So for that reason, I wrote the 3 laws of exponential capabilities. I'll go through these quickly here. The first one is that with automation, every exponential decrease in effort creates an equal and opposite exponential increase in capabilities. Just to give you a quick example of that, in 1850, the average transportation speed in the United States, most of the world too, was 4 miles an hour. Mostly people walking, some riding horses. And over a lifetime, somebody would average about 73,000 miles over their entire life. 1900, that doubled to 8 miles an hour. 1950, it jumped up to 24 miles an hour. And then in 2000, because so many people were flying, it got up to 75 miles an hour. So if you're following that trend line, by 2050, we should be averaging around 225 miles an hour. And then over a lifetime, we put in 7.3 million miles on average. So we went from 73,000 miles in a lifetime to 7.3 million miles in a lifetime. It's a 100-fold increase in just 200 years. So how are we going to get there? Law number 2, as we raise the bar for our achievements, we reset the norm for our expectations. And as today's accomplishments become more common, mega accomplishments will take their place. So we just need to set the bar higher. We need to set our sights up way up here rather than just something down here. We can now think faster, know faster, and do faster than ever before in history. So where's our next generation jobs going to come from? Well, they're going to come from future industries. So I like to focus on what I call the disruptive 8, and these are 8 technologies that over the next couple decades are going to affect literally every person on planet Earth. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of these, but a few of them. We'll start with the trillion sensor movement here. This Dr. Janice Burzek in 2013 held an event called the Trillion Sensor Summit in San Francisco, and he brought people together, and he is asking the basic question of how long will it be before we can reach the first trillion sensors in the world? And when I talk about sensors, these are things that can sense light and heat and moisture and actually millions of different kinds of things. They concluded that we will reach the first trillion sensors in the world in 2022 to 2024, somewhere around there. And that by 2036, we're going to reach the first 100 trillion sensors in the world. Now, what this means is sensors are going to become very tiny, very ubiquitous, very easy to mass produce, very inexpensive. So we're going to start embedding sensors in paints and coatings. We'll paint the sides of walls, the sides of bridges. We'll embed sensors in our clothing. We'll have information coming from everywhere. This looks like a real simple little Band-Aid skin patch thing. It's actually a very sophisticated piece of technology, lots of information coming and going. The first iPhone that came out in 2007 had 5 sensors in it. Now the average smartphone has over 20 sensors in it, so the number of sensors in a smartphone is doubling every 4 years. So my prediction is that the first trillion sensors will happen somewhere around 2022, and that this will open the door for lots of micro industries, sensor installers, data marketplaces, design studios, repair shops, and much, much more. The Internet of Things. Internet of Things happened somewhere between 2008 and 2009. That's when the company Cisco decided that the number of things connected to the internet started to exceed the number of people on Earth. 6.8 billion people on Earth, 6.8 billion devices. Now the projections are we're going to hit somewhere around 25 billion in a year or so. So for the past 2 decades, we've actually been building this digital infrastructure over everything physical in the world. But it wasn't until we actually discovered blockchain that we had some sort of an overall architecture in mind. And is that the right answer? People are asking that question right now. So the advent of 5G, which is coming, South Korea is going to be the first country that actually implements it nationwide early next year. 5G is much more than just speed. It tackles every dimension of the internet. So 5G will put additional computing power and speed on the very edge of everything that we're doing. It'll cause us to rethink many things, and it will become one of the new micro-industry, kind of the thing that spurs it along. And so we're going to see lots of 5G-related issues that come up here. Lots of new businesses. Now, when we start talking back and forth to whether it's Alexa or Siri or Cortana or Google, whatever device we're talking back and forth to, we're actually building the brain of the robot. I like to put it in these terms because we're making these devices smarter, and they're getting smarter as we go. Now, the robot that I referred to, the robot could be a driverless car, it could be a drone, it could be an actual robot, it could be some other device. But as we add this level of intelligence to the things around us, it gives us additional capabilities. And voice commerce is coming. Voice commerce is when we can just look at something. Oh, I like that jacket. I want to buy that. And suddenly we just bought it. So we're going to have lots of devices coming out of the woodwork that we didn't know were going to be devices. And we're connecting everything around us. So in January at the Consumer Electronics Show, there was a company that was making smart jeans. I thought, wow, this is really a stupid product. Then I realized that if you're walking down the street and you're supposed to turn right, it'll buzz on your right side. If you're supposed to turn left, it'll buzz on your left side. So everywhere you go, you have a little GPS in your pants. L'Oreal's making a smart hairbrush. As you brush it through your hair, the sound that the bristles make as it's going by your hair, you can tell if you have split ends, cracked hair, and it will suggest shampoos and conditioners to cure that. Baidu is making smart chopsticks to tell you if your food is safe to eat. The pepper projector, this thing's really cool. It'll work as a regular salt and pepper shaker, but it will also scan the plate of food in front of you. It'll tell you how much you weigh before you eat it and how much you're going to weigh afterwards. Biometric coffee maker. This thing's really smart. You get up in the morning, you put your hand on it, and knows exactly how much caffeine should go in your coffee. We think it should have a Jack Daniel's switch on it, too. The IC Pooch, I love this one. If you have pets at home, you can remotely dispense food for your pet, and then you can FaceTime them. So if you have pets at home and you're not FaceTiming them today, then well, shame on you. This is a really nice one. This is a VR helmet for chickens. Naturally, this begs the question that if the chicken thinks it's a free-range chicken, is it? The people at Chick-fil-A really love that one. So. And this one's for medical students. Since there's an eye chart on the wall, we think it's to improve their hindsight. So the prediction for the Internet of Things, 10% of the world's population will be wearing clothing connected to the Internet just by 2022, less than 4 years from now. And that this is going to open the door for tons of micro-industries. Internet of Things, smart building installers, smart clothing developers, health monitors, proximity alert systems, and so much more. As my favorite physicist, Max Planck, likes to say, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. All right. There's been some talks on drones, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking about drones. Every time we add a new feature to drones, it gives us additional capabilities. So what additional capabilities would you get with a drone if it came with speakers on it, microphones? How about infrared filters or sensors? How about if we put robotic arms on the drone? What things could you do with it then? Maybe lasers? How about if you put wheels on it? You could drive it on the ground as well as fly in the sky? How about if you put a tow line on it? How about this for Halloween? That'd be kind of cool, huh? Emergency rescue drones. You know, right now we have the ability to eliminate forest fires completely. See, it's really easy to put out a fire if it's this big. But instead, we tend to wait until it turns into a huge blaze and then throw a lot of people and money at it. But we could have drones flying over every forest. We could spot every fire when it's very tiny and then send in fire extinguisher drones to just put it out. Doesn't that make more sense? In the future, every city, when they get a 911 call, their first response will be to get eyes on it. They'll send up a drone to have a good view so then they can decide what the response should be. Rather than putting people in harm's way, we send out drones to go search for somebody that's lost. All of the news organizations are going to be the first competing to see who can get the first live coverage of some incident. Naturally, emergency beer drones, they're going to be a hot item. But it's no longer going to be just one-off drones. We're moving into an era where we're going to have fleets of drones. Every police department, every news organization, every forestry department, airports, farmers, college campuses, they're all going to have their own fleets of drones. This is going to give rise to drone command centers. And these drone command centers, we don't know exactly what they're going to look like, but they're going to start showing up everywhere. If we assume that someday every major city in the United States is going to have 50,000 drones flying overhead, it raises lots of questions. What's the role and responsibility of the city itself in managing those drones? Because they're going to get a lot of complaints. And then what are the legal privacy barriers for protecting people? We haven't had any of these discussions yet. So who has the right to shoot a drone out of the air? More importantly, who has the obligation to shoot a drone out of the air when it's being menacing or causing problems? And what exactly does that mean? Here's a picture of a drone that's actually burning trash off of a power line, but how do we know if it's burning trash or if it's actually trying to cut through the power line? And who makes that decision? We haven't gotten into any of these policy issues yet. We're a long ways from that. Does the right to bear arms also give us the right to own a drone that's armed? That's kind of a scary proposition, huh? Cities are going to employ their own fleets of drones. This is going to happen fairly soon. And as drones are flying over cities, we're going to start creating digital models of the city, and these digital models will get better over time. Now, once we get to a certain point, this will enable us to create search engines for the physical world. We will be able to search on attributes that we don't even know are searchable right now. I want something that smells like this or tastes like this. I want something with this texture, with this level of reflectivity, with this harmonic vibration. We just have to put the query in, and the search engine will figure out how to do all the rest of the work. So we will be able to ask questions like, where is that dog with rabies right now? What's the heaviest traffic intersection in the city today? How close did John Doe get to Jane Doe in the last 24 hours? In the infrastructure report, what's the most dangerous bridge in the city today? This is going to open the door for lots of interesting possibilities. And yes, drone taxis are going to be a thing. They're going to be a thing real soon. Now, Airbus hasn't announced this yet, but this is one of the concepts they're looking at. that look like fun? Now, once we have drones that fly people around, and there's already a company in Beijing that's offering drone service across the city, this will give rise to mini airports. Now, we're not going to just allow these drones to take off in any street or in any driveway. We have to have that all controlled. And mini airports, if you think of like the parking lot for a grocery store, that's about the size of a mini airport. As we have enough drones coming and going, we'll have to have more than one landing pad, and then we have to create a terminal for people coming and going, for cars dropping people off. This is going to happen in the not too distant future here. Uber's actually spending quite a bit of time looking at this issue. So what are these things going to look like? So my prediction is search engines for the physical world will become common in 2028. And we're going to reach the first billion drones in the world 2030. And drone taxi will become a common form of transportation in 2030. This is happening very soon. This is also going to open the door for tons of micro industries, drone agriculture scanners, maintenance companies, rescue services, taxi services, and so much more. Now, the topic of digital twins, I find this so fascinating, and it doesn't get talked about very much, but as we start putting more and more sensors on things, we're going to be able to create a digital replica of physical pieces of equipment, whether it's an airplane, a ship, or a tractor, or turbine in a power plant. If something breaks down, somebody 1,000 miles away will be able to actually pull up that digital twin of that piece of equipment and tell what went wrong and then send people out to fix it. They can also start anticipating when things are going to go wrong and create some sort of a preventative maintenance program for it. But over time, as these improve, we're going to be able to eventually enter this piece of equipment remotely, and this is what's called remote robotics. And so how long before we can actually start operating a tractor remotely? So somebody could have a farm here in Indiana, and that could be retired in Arizona, and farmers never actually have to retire then. They could just be operating tractors all their life. So how much longer do we need pilots in the airplanes? I mean, if we can do this, why do we need a pilot in the airplane? We could have a pilot in some office in Silicon Valley flying our plane. Would we feel safe with that? Would we still need the security stuff at airports if there was no pilot on the plane? And how much longer before we have digital twin technology for humans? How long before doctors can monitor somebody's health remotely through their digital twin? I like this idea. I don't like waiting in doctors' offices. I love just calling up the doctor and say, hey, what's wrong with me? Driverless technologies. So the cars that we drive today have actually been in development for 120 years. It's taken that long to get to cars that are this good. So for the past 120 years, cars have been designed around one central function, which is driving. Now, when driving goes away, I mean, all the designers have looked at this, the anthropometric measurements, the 5th percentile female to the 95th percentile male, and how they'll fit into that cockpit of that car. As we move into the driverless era, people are no longer going to drive. So how will this affect our world? I wrote a paper recently on 128 things that will disappear in the driverless car era. Elon Musk has said he's going to have a fully driverless car that goes from LA to New York with no human intervention before the end of this year. He said that last year too, though. So this is what it looks like in a driverless car today. You see the guy with his hands on his lap there, the nervous guy there? We have to develop a level of trust before we're we're going to move into this era. I mean, it probably won't take that long, but we've got to get there. But this is what, if we're no longer designing cars around driving, this is what Volvo looks at how we design cars. So for the car designers, is this the same job? They're still designing cars, but they're not designing it around driving. Do any of the same skills apply? It raises lots of interesting questions because when you talk about jobs going away, it actually gets to be kind of blurry, kind of messy. We're still going to have nurses and doctors and teachers and accountants, but they're going to be using vastly different tools. So is it the same job? One of the things that's still missing from the driverless world is Wi-Fi everywhere. See, if I'm driving through the mountains and the car in front of me just hit a deer, I need to get information about that deer, and I might be a few seconds behind him, but I need to get information sent to me. Now, some of the decision-making happens on the car itself. Some of it happens in the cloud. So through all these connections, that latency period, that time it takes for the information to get from the cloud to the car is a huge issue. And we've got to solve that. So Elon Musk is planning on throwing up 12,000 satellites into space to provide this global internet coverage. That might be part of the answer. I don't think it's the whole thing, though. So cars become these rolling data centers, and they need to talk to each other. But things start disappearing. The car loan industry is going to go away. I rented a car in Chicago last night. I can tell that that industry is dying. Uber is causing it to die. 86% of the cars on the road today just have one person in them. So the people that own fleets of vehicles, if you think about 10 years from now, stepping out in front of your house, you pull out your phone, punch in, I want to go to work, I want to go to school, I want to go shopping, a driverless car comes and picks you up, takes you to where you want to go, and from there, picks somebody else up and takes them to where they want to go. We transition from a just-in-case mindset, I have a car in my garage just in case I need to go somewhere, to a just-in-time mindset. I can summon a vehicle at any time that I need it. Right in that line of thinking is the big transition, because somebody's going to own these cars other than us. Somebody's going to own this fleet of cars, and when they look at, oh, well, we just need to design cars for a single person inside of them. If they need a larger car, they'll just summon a larger car, but I can save a lot of money just with one-person vehicles, and so that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to design buildings with queuing stations in front. We're not going to have parking lots anymore. We'll have queuing stations where these driverless vehicles are lined up. The bigger the building, the more complicated the queuing station, because we might have to have a special lane for handicapped vehicles that you can put a wheelchair on. Moms with kids will have to have a different situation for that. Looks like electric cars are going to dominate this. That's the direction we're moving right now. In driverless highways, the ones that you can only pull a vehicle on it if you can switch into driverless mode, that'll happen somewhere between 2030 and 2035. The life expectancy of these cars is going to be much shorter than we can imagine. If I have a car that's picking up people and dropping them off 24 hours a day, seven days a week, it's very easy to imagine them putting on as much as 1,000 miles in a single day. That means after 10 months, you have 300,000 miles on a single car. Is that car wore out after 300,000 miles? We don't know yet. We don't know yet. But one autonomous car is going to replace 30 traditional cars. Changes things a lot. So it affects lots of other things besides just our highways. The airports, the average airport in the United States, 41% of the income comes from parking and transportation services. All of this starts to dwindle and go away over the next couple decades. Lots of jobs go away as a result of that. And we have lots of consequences from distracted driving, 38,000 deaths a year, 4.4 million injuries. And here's the key thing. We spend right at $500 billion repairing people after car accidents. We've just grown to accept that. That's just okay with us. $500 billion a year. So 1 out of every $6 in the healthcare industry is attributed to car accidents. 20 to 40% of sales tax for cities comes from car sales. That's a huge number. If I owned a fleet of cars, I'm going to buy those cars in the cheapest possible place, maybe Wyoming or something, so I can get no sales tax there. I mean, I'm not going to pay sales tax at the high rate for your local area. Cities are going to lose lots of income. Over 10% of retail today is car-related, all the car shops, the brake shops, the tire shops, the car washes, even gas stations and dealerships. And traffic violations make up a good chunk of city income. Those are all going to dwindle and go away. New York City in 2015 brought in $1.9 billion from traffic violation. I got to tell you, there's a whole lot of bad karma in that number right there. Cities are going to lose over 50% of their income. They don't realize it yet. This is going to affect cities in so many different ways. They can compensate for it. There's ways that they can compensate for it, but they haven't been planning for it yet. So teenagers are going to be some of the early adopters. Parents are going to prefer it, but things go wrong. I mean, with teenagers, how can anything go wrong? At what age is it okay to put a child in a car by themselves? If I make a car that recognizes a child on one end, or a teacher on one end and a parent on the other end, can I put a 6-year-old in a car to drive to school by themselves, and for how long? Is 10 minutes okay? Is 30 minutes too long? I mean, things go wrong. We haven't had any discussions or debates on these topics. We haven't set up any public policy. All of these things have to be worked through. The trucking industry loves this idea because the first phase will be what's called platooning, where they put a driver in the first truck and they have 3 slave trucks behind it. This actually saves 75% of the labor costs for the trucking industry. Here's what Mercedes is looking at here. See, what they did is they just transitioned from a truck to a passenger vehicle. Very slick. All right, how's this going to affect the retail world? The first shopping center was built in the United States in 1956, and the very last one was built in 2006. These are enclosed shopping malls. We're starting to see bricks and mortar affected in lots of different ways. It doesn't mean it goes away, but something is going to be changing there. And so is this the retail apocalypse, and what comes next? I think it's driverless mobile businesses. So this idea of, in traditional retail stores, actually spend a lot of time and money trying to bring people to their location, when the new mantra will be, you can go to where the people are. Somebody needs something from a convenience store late at night, the convenience store can pull up on your driveway and you can just go out and pick out what you want, and there's no store clerk or anything, it'll just charge you for what you take. We can have mobile hair shops, grooming shops, dog grooming, mobile banks, mobile bike repair, bike rental, nail shops, coffee shops, lots of different retail. Going to get very creative. I mean, would you buy a pie from the pie minister? Maybe. Every time you have a softball game, every time you have a parade down Main Street, these things will show up for business. If you're going to have a convention in your city, I mean, you could have a convention out in some remote location. You can just summon 500 hotel rooms to come to your city and set up. You have the convention, and then they can go someplace else. I mean, these can also be mobile hospital beds as well. FEMA might be looking at that. In my mind, the mall of the future will be like a giant warehouse, and every morning, these mobile businesses will pull in and set up. It'll be a different configuration, different kinds of businesses every day. That's the kind of place that I would love to go to because it's a different experience every day. The food truck industry today is paving the way for a far different type of retail world in the future. Now, the thing that's missing in my mind is what I refer to as a GeoSmart cash register. A GeoSmart cash register, since we have these different taxing retail sales tax districts throughout the country, this will know exactly where it's at and what the right amount of tax is. And it will remit micro payments to each of the taxing authorities with every transaction. If somebody figures that out, that's going to pave the way for tons more people to get into this mobile retail because it takes all the work out of it. So my prediction is that driverless technology will be the most disruptive technology in all history because it just affects everything. It's more disruptive than the wheel, the electricity, or the car itself because it's going to affect more people in a shorter period of time than any of these other technologies. This paves the way for just tons of micro industries, driverless delivery services, retail storefronts, medical services, gaming salons, and so much more. This is what an intersection will look like in the driverless era. Yeah, kind of the way people drive in India right now, but the coming meat wars, and this will affect Indiana here quite a bit. I spent, about 3 years ago, I spent a couple days with Mark Post from Holland. He's the founder of Mosa Meats. He created the first lab-grown hamburger, a $350,000 hamburger that he had taste tested on BBC television by some food critics. And it's real interesting listening to Mark as he talks about this. Some people say, well, it's too dry or too coarse. And well, we can engineer around that. We can add more marbling, we could do that. These things are grown with actual animal cells, and they're grown in a bioreactor like this, and it takes 8 to 10 weeks to grow a vat of meat. And at first I thought, well, this is going to open the door for lots of head-on-head competition with beef, pork, and fish, and chicken. But then it occurred to me that very likely they're going to start with more exotic meats, things like wombat meat and penguin meat and bumblebee meat. I don't know about you, but I kind of like the idea of bumblebee meat. Now, we could actually create systems for creating human meat, but that brings up shades of Jeffrey Dahmer, and there are probably going to be laws against that. But there are companies that are making materials out of this too. So they're making materials out of like leathers and stuff. And so if we go get stem cells from Hollywood celebrities, we could actually grow special leathers and everything. I mean, would you buy a purse if it was an actual George Clooney purse? You may have that option in the future here. All right, 3D printing, I'll go through this quickly here. Lee Cronin believes that we're going to be able to 3D print all of our pills, pharmaceutical drugs, and we're going to be able to print them in exact dosages, all in a single pill every day. In the past, we've seen prosthetic limbs, prosthetic hands, and they were pretty crude. They're getting much more sophisticated now. These 3D printers are doing lots of things. 150 prosthetic eyes in an hour. This is a big hit on Halloween, I've got to tell you. living tissue. We're able to print with living tissue. And this is an actual heart that's printed with working blood vessels in it. Not quite ready for prime time yet, but getting much closer. So I've been asking this question, how long before we can actually 3D print an entire replacement body for myself? I mean, something that's maybe 18, 20 years old, more muscular, better looking, hair on his head. Is this what we're moving towards here? I think I'll wear the head with a big smile today because it just seems right. So 3D printing is going off in thousands of different directions. This is a 3D printed house that was printed in Russia last year. So this is a 400 square foot house, around $10,000, did it in 24 hours. This is a British architect that's looking at reinventing high-rise buildings, having people design their own unit and having it 3D printed actually on the top of the building and then sliding it into place. So is this how we're going to do skyscrapers in the future? Maybe. But this is what a lot of people are thinking, that we're going to set up a rig and just 3D print a house in less than a day. And as this technology improves, though, we're not just printing the structure, we're also printing the wiring in the walls, the plumbing in the walls, the cabinets in the kitchen, the toilets, the sinks. We're printing the insulation, the windows, and the roofing. And then, I mean, if you get tired of your house, all you have to do is just grind it up and reprint it. I mean, you don't even have to clean it first. Your wife or husband gets mad at you, you might come home to an all-new house someday. Once we're able to 3D print our walls, we no longer have the need for flat walls. Every wall can become an artistic centerpiece. Architects are going to have a heyday with this because they can create all these freeform structures, unlike anything we can create today. In fact, our very definition of what a house is, what a condo is, what an office is, all of these things start to change as we have this capability. So how long before 3D printed houses become a better option? In Dubai, they're saying that they plan to have 30% of their buildings 3D printed by 2030. This is a bridge that was being printed in Amsterdam. So my prediction is 3D printing is going to be able to work with over 10,000 different materials by 2025. That's going to open the door for lots of material science people. And creating tons of micro industries, 3D printed buildings, clothing, furniture, pharmaceuticals, so much more. The future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. All right, now let's dive into this artificial intelligence and the future of education. So in 2012, when I was giving a talk in Istanbul at the TED, I was talking about teacherless education, and after my talk, one of the executives from Google came up to me and he says, we're really interested in teacherless education because we want to educate Africa, and teachers don't want to go to Africa. Now, this is a very revealing moment for me because no, teachers don't want to go to Africa. They don't want to go to Pakistan or Siberia or Antarctica. There's lots of places teachers don't want to go. In fact, by one count, we're short 18 million teachers globally, and a full 23% of kids growing up today don't go to any school whatsoever. And if we continually insist on inserting a teacher between us and everything we have to learn in the future, we can't possibly keep up with the demands of the future. So the role of education is changing. It's no longer possible to know what businesses are going to need 4 to 5 years in advance. We're currently preparing students for jobs that don't exist, using technology that hasn't been invented to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. The average person entering the workforce in 2030 had better plan to reboot their career 8 to 10 times throughout their working life. If you remember the story about Facebook buying Oculus Rift in 2014, there was this instant uptick in the demand for virtual reality coders, virtual reality engineers, experience creators, and nobody was teaching it, certainly not the Oculus Rift version of it. So this has given rise to this idea of micro colleges. Now, at the DaVinci Institute that I run, we started a coding school. It was the second in the nation. The first one was in Chicago. We call it DaVinci Coders. It was a 13, 14-week coding class to teach people how to become computer programmers. So I think of a micro college as an immersive form of post-secondary education done in a short period of time. This is one of our classes at the DaVinci Institute. We give people a certificate at the end, but we think that micro colleges are going to go off in 1,000 different directions. Print designers, 3D print designers for training centers, crowdfunding experts, dog breeders, brewmasters for brew pubs, drone pilot schools. But artificial intelligence is giving us a whole new way of looking at things. We're sitting on this brink of this big revolution, and it's all because of many decades of research that's been done in institutions all along the way. So a lot of early adopters, we're seeing headlines about this all the time. Self-taught AI beats doctors at predicting heart attacks. AI is learning what makes you cry at the movies, which will also, it'll soon be able to understand what makes you buy in a store. AI is able to convert images of food into lists of ingredients. Microsoft views the human genome as just another coding language, which is fascinating. So Microsoft believes that rather than taking pills when you get sick in the future, you just download another algorithm to get better. They think they'll be able to cure cancer and diabetes and many other things in the very near future. So then I had this big light bulb moment, and it all centered around when Google bought this company called DeepMind. And they applied DeepMind, this AI company, they applied it to this game called Breakout. And Breakout was a real simple game. It was a game of Pong, basically. And they gave it very few instructions other than to maximize the score. So after 30 minutes, it was very crude at how it was playing the game, but it was getting smarter. It was learning as it was going. So after 2 hours, it had figured out how to master the game, even at a high rate of speed. That's what that looked like. And then after 4 hours, it figured out the optimal strategy, a way to dig a tunnel around the outside in a way that even the designers of the game didn't know was possible. And so this is what that looks like. I always hate to play against people that are this good. So then after it figured out this, they applied DeepMind to 49 other Atari 2600 games. And in each case, it learned how to master the game. It kept getting smarter and smarter and smarter until it mastered each game. So then it occurred to me that if we apply AI to a teacher bot, the new game becomes how to find the fastest way to teach each new student. Hyper-individualized education. Over time, AIs are going to learn every student's proclivities, all their idiosyncrasies, all their preferred reference points, and how to keep them engaged in learning even in the face of lots of distractions. It'll know what skills they're deficient in, what's needed to bring them up to speed, and how and when to schedule the training, and when they've mastered the new topic. So it'll know when things are working, when things are not working, and it'll know when we've mastered the new skill. So throughout this training, you're going to be able to learn things faster and faster and faster, 2 times faster, 4 times faster, maybe 10 times faster. The idea of completing an entire college degree in 1 month may be possible in the future. So my prediction is that AI-enhanced humans will dominate the art world by 2030. And that by 2030, the largest company on the internet is going to be an education-based company that we haven't heard of yet. This will be larger than Google, larger than Facebook, larger than Apple. The way I've been looking at it, this is the biggest opportunity in the online world that nobody has quite cracked the code for yet. Somebody's going to figure it out. This is also going to open the door for AI-enhanced human app builders, training systems for businesses, traffic control systems, warning systems, and so much more. So the future is ours to write. Always remember that the future is never a destination. It's always a journey. It's always changing. So by 2030, the average person will own printed clothing, live in a printed house, have packages delivered by drones, own more than one robot, work as freelancer, frequently use driverless cars, and will be capable of accomplishing 10 times as much as the average person today. So we're entering a period of unprecedented opportunity. So why is this so important? Humanity is going to change more in the next 20 years than in all human history. At the same time, things can go wrong. We're going to create many more breaking points, so risk factors are going to increase exponentially. And our children's children who haven't even been born yet are counting on you. They're counting on the people in this room to make great decisions. As Steve Jobs says, right now is one of those moments when you are influencing the future. But sometimes our best efforts just look a lot like this. Yeah, pretty much just like that. So for any of you that are interested in a copy of my book, my new book, Epiphany Z, came out last year. I have a few copies out front that I'll be glad to sign for you. They're $20 each, and the money goes to our scholarship fund for our students. And any of you that would like more information about what we do at the DaVinci Institute, you can sign up for a free newsletter. And I thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you. Yeah, we could take a few questions. Anybody that come over to the microphones here? Go ahead.
It seems like a lot of the jobs that you are saying are going to be replaced are in the middle class, and I was wondering how you would see that. Would you think there would be a wage stratification that would occur between the lower and higher class?
So the question is about middle class jobs versus the low end jobs, and the wage stratification that would result from that. Actually, there's lots of lower skilled jobs that they'll have a hard time actually creating automation for. The task of cleaning is far more complicated than people realize. So as an example, if you have a robot that's going to clean your house, and the robot is going across the floor and it comes across a piece of paper, how does it know that that's a valuable piece of paper or a piece of trash? We have to train it, and so that's a complicated set of tasks that's usually performed by a low-skilled individual. So I think we're going to run into a lot more of those type of situations. Question over here.
Okay, I'll just be kind of loud if that's okay.
Sure.
So one of my big questions is, a lot of us, I think, have this notion that we have to have jobs in order to survive, because jobs equal prosperity, equal a good life for our children. But do you think the notion of jobs will ever start to fade out of our society, that you don't have to start getting a job, you don't have to go out because things have become so automated?
I think that may be possible. Right now, I don't think we have the political will for a guaranteed minimum income. And we haven't really come to the right conclusion as to how that would ever get paid for. But that might evolve over time. So that's a possibility. Is there more effective things that people can do? Actually, I think all this technology gives people additional capabilities, and they're going to get very creative. I think they're going to create businesses. They're going to come up with ideas that I think that are just interesting to them. Doing a job that you're just not interested in, you go to work just because you need to pay the rent, that may evolve into something that's far more interesting in the future. But it's a great question. I don't think we have any good relevant situations that we can draw from. I know the guaranteed minimum income has been tested multiple times, but it's all isolated small communities, and it's relatively small amount of money that's involved in that. So we've not seen it done on a mass scale yet, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Do we have another question here?
I want to know whether or not, I know you talked about Elon Musk with him talking about putting different satellites up to increase the interconnectivity of the world, but how would he deal with like space junk and things like that that are creating problems now with putting things in our atmosphere?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know, there's lots of different striations of space, and so even though there's tons and tons of space junk up there, and the space junk can be just a chip of paint or a screw that flies through your spacecraft, it just wreaks havoc. But there are systems that are being used now to track it, and I know people that are working on trying to clean up the space junk. We'll see if they're successful. So doing something like these little satellites that are floating around are essentially a smartphone that's up there. They're really small. And I think they're a little bit different layer than most of the space junk is in right now. So I'm not privy to all the details on which layer those are in though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. So you've mentioned a lot of really great technology that solves a lot of problems for humanity, but do you see any of the things that you talked about solving the biggest problem of climate change to humanity's survival?
Well, there's lots of work being done on the energy world. Incidentally, I'm not a fan of the term climate change because I, as an individual, don't know what to do with that term climate change. Now, if we focused on pollution, I know what to do about pollution. I don't know what I should do about climate change, though. It just creates lots of hysteria in society. If we focused on pollution, that would solve majority of the climate change issues, and we can all get our head wrapped around that better. Each time we think we're taking a step forward, doing electric cars so we get rid of the gas engines, the electric cars have their own pollution in the background creating the electricity. So sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. So yeah, I'm not sure that we're getting there quite as fast as we need to. So I think we need a few more breakthroughs along the way. Yeah, I wish I had better answers for that.
Thanks. Hello. Could you speak a little bit about what the education company would look like that you talked about?
Yeah, most of the online education today, all of the MOOCs, the Coursera's, the Udacities, the other ones that are out there, have basically taken the classroom experience and put it online. I think the new model is going to be something far above that we're going to find out new ways of actually teaching people that doesn't just replicate the classroom experience. I think we're going to have to incentivize it in different ways too, so that some of the money goes to the like the iTunes that stores all the courses, and some of it goes to the course creator. I think there's other things that need to go in there too. I think slivers of payment need to go to people that are the auditors, the evaluators, the people that are rating it. I think we need to have people that are kind of validating each of these courses, and I think slivers of payment need to go to that as well. And it becomes a much more complicated system than we have today because it involves micropayments, even what I refer to as nano payments. But that can incentivize lots of other industries. So as an example, if you're selling 1 billion courses in a year and you're only getting 2 cents off of every course, that still amounts to a fair amount of money. It could involve VR or mixed reality type experiences. It could involve lots of other things too. We've played around with this idea of microcredits, You know, every college credit, 100 microcredits would equal 1 college credit. So if you go to a movie and you take a test, then you get 3.2 microcredits. You read a book, you take a test, you get 14.7 microcredits. There's lots of other things that we could incentivize other than just the traditional experience of going to a class. Microcredits could open the door for lots of other things as well. So we've played around with different ideas. We don't have a totally clear picture of what this is going to look like yet.
Do you have an idea of what a lag behind period is for other parts of the world? Because clearly the United States is in a better, I guess, economic situation for, and maybe structural situation, so we can handle these future technologies, but obviously other places in the world aren't as far ahead, so they might be, our 2030 is really their 2010 or something like that.
Yeah. Great question. Actually, there's some countries like South Korea is actually farther ahead. Japan is farther ahead in lots of areas than we are. But you're right. There's lots of countries in Africa and Asia that are lagging way behind. As we've seen Africa come up to speed with smartphones, virtually everybody in Africa now has access to smartphones. It's quite fascinating how quickly they've spread throughout the continent. And in some respects, some of these countries that seem to lag behind us are going to be able to leapfrog us because they don't have all the legacy equipment that they're worrying about. And certainly the ones that don't have roads and infrastructure will probably be able to use drones to fly places. So all of that's going to transition in some interesting ways. But you know, the country of China has been investing heavily in Africa, building lots of infrastructure there, and so they're heavily influencing that entire continent. They're building entire cities just for the Chinese investors to live in that are investing in Africa. So we're going to start seeing a lot of these mega projects that I refer to start cropping up around the world. The one thing that the internet has created that doesn't get talked about very much is we're creating much more awareness of the world around us. And so we're far more aware of things happening around the world. Somebody releases a report in Moscow, people in Helsinki and Mexico City and in Medellin, Colombia know about it 10 minutes later. And it's gotten to the point that if we don't know about it, we're feeling left out. So this awareness is actually shortening the development time of these countries. So even though they lag behind, they may not lag behind too much longer.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, one more question. Go right ahead.
Hi. So I have a question about education. So like for me, education is basically...
You gotta look closer to the microphone.
Okay. Education is basically the speed you learn knowledge and your ability to apply it. And basically, like the maximum speed of our learning is basically our 5 senses, like what we hear, what we see. It's like the fastest as we can go for now. But like there's like an idea, I think, like a chipping brain, for like chipping tiny brain. Like, do you think it's like will be applied in your future or just outrageous?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of invasive surgery to make people smarter, but there might be a lot of attempts to put chips in brains. I think we're going to figure out ways of doing it without doing anything invasive. I think we'd do it on the surface or something. Yeah, so how do you think about we got this big giant pool of information out here, and how do we take this distance between our brain and that giant pool of information and make it shorter and seamless and invisible? 20 years ago, if you asked somebody a set of difficult questions and they had to go to a library to get answers, it may take 10 hours to get answers to all those questions. Now today, you can probably get the same answers in 10 minutes just using a search engine, keyboard, and display. So going from 10 hours to 10 minutes, the next iteration will be the 10-second interface. And what does that look like? A 10-second interface is when you put maybe something on a person's head and you ask them any questions. In 10 seconds, they can think their way to an answer. What does that look like? Can we do that? I would love to see somebody create that. And then after that, then we need the 10-millisecond interface. So if we can come up with that way of short-circuiting the distance between our brain and all this information, I think that works in our favor. It can also work against us too, because then we kind of lose control of our ability to be human then. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That remains to be seen, but there'll be a lot of ethical debates about it though.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here today. Thank you.